Hey, hey, welcome to another episode. I am Dagny.
And I'm Damali.
And in this episode, we want to reflect and discuss with you the dynamics around language and linguistics, focusing
Yes.
on how it has been and currently is, and possibly will continue to influence a variety of aspects of globalization when it comes to colonization, when it comes to
hmm
cultural enhancements or dilution, and also when it comes
Yeah.
to how metrics are used to measure intelligence or accomplishments when it comes to what language do you speak and what accent you have, as well as if you are like us who tends to interact with a variety of people who their first language was possibly not the language you're speaking or possibly multiple
hmm
languages. How do you navigate really being, not that you're not being genuine, but how do you navigate really getting to know the person or actually truly expressing yourself if it's in a language that wasn't your first language? So those are different things we're going to dive in and workshop and analyze in this episode. So to
hmm
start, we're going to start with this concept of the English language. That's what we're going to be focusing on mostly in this episode. In terms of how historically it's been utilized when it comes to imposing on other people. So, Damali, I'm going to let you share in terms
Mm.
of your insight on that. Also, because Damali has been teaching others the language of English, which then also got her to have a different perspective of when you're teaching it is very different when it's just like actually the language you've just been speaking forever without
hmm
actually having to go to a class for it.
Yes.
So go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. We kind of want to talk about this, linguistic purism and like what happens to the languages when you're not using when not every single word is the part of the language. And then I looked up this other interesting like history bit, which I think it was like after I don't know, everyone knows the potato famine, right? That happened in Ireland, and it was time due to colonization. There was a time where the UK banned Irish people from speaking Irish. Like they had to everyone has to speak English and that's it, and you would get in trouble if you're not speaking that language. Um, and I seen a video about that and how that had affected the country and things like that. And so it made me think about like, oh, well, what about that makes me think of nowadays with all these like English loan words that we use, like Google or like YouTube or like okay or like cafe, like
Like,
all these words that are
even the
like
word
or
like.
like
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like right. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like and it's like you hear it in other languages. And so there seems to be this on one side people are like it's fine to use English loan words, it's fine to use some English because it helps us in the globalized work field, because if you're traveling around, one of the main languages obviously is English, so it makes sense to know those words and use them. But on the other hand, some people like I think I looked up, I think it was a tidbit about the in France where there's some people where they want to only they don't want to use the English loan words. They want to make like for example, the French word for Google kind of thing. They want like everything, or cloud compute. They want all of these words to actually be their own. And in this like podcast, we're going to talk about like is it okay to use English, or is it like does it hinder you in the work field if you're not using the English loan words, or you don't know them, or does it make you not want to learn English, or you don't want to try learning other languages because like it kind of gets in the way of your movement in the languages.
So then
And yeah, so
pause
we kind
before
of
you go forward for
yes.
our dear friend listening. Can you break down on what
Yes.
is an English loan word?
Yes. English loan words are kind of how it sounds like when you loan. I think it's part of it, like how you loan something, right? So, for example, whether you're using like French or Spanish or Japanese, let's say, although I think they probably have a word for, you use an English word in your language. Like you don't have like the word Google, for example, would be a type of loan word, right? Or like the word, I think like cafe, I think is one, or like tweet or like selfie, things that like we kind of made later, right? Or like okay, and it's like so it's like you'll be speaking your language, you're speaking like French or Portuguese or I don't know something like that, and you're speaking your language, and then all of a sudden you say okay in it, or you use the word Google, instead of using the translation of that word. So that's kind of what that English loan word is. And that's where I said it, people don't know that some people think that it stunts the growth if we're so like focused on translating every single loan word that's like created, especially for things like Google, where that obviously wasn't a word 50 years ago. And it's funny, and then the fact that it's transformed the part of speech. Like it used to be Google used to be like a noun, like Google the company, and then you go online. Now people say, I'm gonna Google something. Like we literally made up a word. We made a verb out of this company. It's like, wait,
company name.
What?
Yes.
50 years ago. Yeah, company name. 50 years ago, that word was not made. Even 40. Yeah, it wasn't made yet, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess part of why, I mean, it can't be said for all loan words. Some loan words are older that have been just used forever. But it's funny how this newer one, and people are thinking, everyone knows what Google is. So do we have to change the word? Not. And then also, or some people do change it. Like I know in Chinese, Google is like Google. And there's a whole like characters made for the word Google. And that's, but I feel like even if you said Google or Google, like we probably would know what you're saying, right? So I just thought it would be interesting to like, to break down how that changed the language and like, do we need to do that? Especially, and I think it's more so like when students are learning and in school where they're kind of wondering like, should we spend time like finding a new, like whenever a new English loan word is made, do we spend time like we have to hurry up and make a translation for this in our language, even though all the students have already learned the English loan word? So it's like you're making them have to remember, and even though they're already used to the one word. So that's part of that whole like linguistic purism and how it's like,
and I think that is an interesting mindset in terms of when you're looking at whether or not having English words being utilized throughout other languages, does that dilute the other language? And with these examples you're noting where it's a lot of the English word used to be it's a name, it was a company name or a person's name, and then it has become either a slang term or an action word that just everybody else already uses. So even similar to Xerox, Xerox, it used to be before, I'm going to make a copy, I'm going to make a Xerox copy, I'm going to make a copy on the Xerox machine. And then after a while, it's like, I'm just going to go make a Xerox. And everyone kind of knew what that meant. Now nobody do copies because apparently nobody uses paper these days, which I mean, then you shouldn't be cutting down trees anymore if that's the case, but whatever. Yeah. So it's I think, I don't know, due to my frame of reference being English, right? So I take note of how there's a lot of English words. All these companies, yes, everyone says the word YouTube because it was an American company. You say Google is an American. So all of these things are going to be an English word deal, right? Similar to Apple. Are y'all saying are you going to say La Pomme phone? Or are you just going to say Apple phone, right? Like, do you need to translate it? I think for me, in terms of whether that dilutes the language, I don't think so. Because I feel like it's one thing if all of the slang terms that you're using are only English while the rest of the sentence is in Spanish. Then you're going into Spanglish or Franglais. Like you're obviously creating your own form of pidgin if you choose to put the words together like that. Which, to be honest, I don't think that's a dilution. That might be a metamorphosis, transformation of your language, not necessarily to dilute it. I feel the diluting part of a language comes in when people want to insist that you should be speaking this language with a certain accent, or you need to utilize certain mannerisms, or you need to know the culture of where this language came from in order to speak it. And if we remove those things, then the value, because it's almost like the dilution is meaning that you are removing the value of this language if we keep on using these foreign names in our speech. And so I have yet to see if it really has made such a huge difference. Like the second language that I learned was French. And so I recall that, yes, in French class, they're not using English words ever. All the phrases were French, but it was always phrases, we're practicing with phrases where we're not really talking about tech and companies and brands and slang. We're just like, did you go to school today? I went to school today. But was the sun out? Yes, it was. And it's like, oh, okay, aujourd'hui, c'est bon. And it's like, okay, great. But exactly. But for those who French is they're fluent in it and they're speaking it every day, is it really that half of the stuff they're talking is another language? Or is it just here and there? Are they even using Google or something else? Like I feel, I'm not sure if it's, especially since like what you noted, the French are the ones who are claiming they want to take their language back because they feel it's being colonized because there's too many English words. And I would have to be like, can I listen to y'all on the street and find out if, are your kids just speaking English for no reason and you don't know why?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Where is that coming from? Because I do taking note of in terms of how languages are forming when it comes to children. Since we have kids or people are having their kids watch YouTube, not just like a proper channel, but they're just like on YouTube. And you find that some kids, that's been happening here sometimes actually, where some kids, they start picking up other accents when nobody in the house speaks that accent. But because of the YouTuber they're watching is American or British or South African or something. And this kid is just mimicking the accent. And now they have this other accent to their English that nobody in the family has. And you kind of be wondering like, so what is that does that do anything to their language? Is that something they're going to like stick to forever or not? So I think the influence when it comes to languages is not only whether or not the brand name is not in your language. I think the fact that we now have even more access to hear different accents and different languages more conveniently, regardless if you're living among those types of people. The question also would be, is it okay for some blending to start happening because we have all of that access?
Yeah. And it kind of makes me think of like, since I was of course in China and like, with and obviously most of the time, like whether people I'm working with or Chinese friends, like you're speaking mostly Chinese, but once in a while there will be English words that pop out kind of thing where there's like Chinese, and then all of a sudden, what? Okay. And then okay comes in there and some other, or like the name of some English thing, then they would say everything's Chinese except for that one word. And they just keep on talking like it's like it just kind of popped in and out kind of thing. And I'm always kind of wondering, do you like, I think, and like when they do that, everyone understands what you're talking about. It's not like that one English word, I don't get it. Like it's like you get it because it's like a list kind of thing. And then and then the accents you pick up, yeah, I think for movies or even if you move, like I have some Chinese friends where when they're speaking Chinese, obviously they sound Chinese, like they have the accent. But then when they speak English, if let's say they went to school in England or Australia or abroad, then they have a British accent and they use certain words like in England, like they'll say it in a way that you say if you're British English instead of using like English in America kind of thing. So that of course adds another layer to the languages and all of that. And I just think that I'm not sure if it's that. I mean, I'm not sure how much it dilutes it because it's kind of like if you have like a bunch of water and then all you put is like a one dot of like, I don't know what food coloring or something. And like how I don't know if this is a good metaphor, but like I'm thinking of like water, like if you're talking about being diluted, like I don't know, like salt, like something that won't dilute that much, And I'm like, as long as the person, if they know the bulk of the language, and the only reason we're using sometimes the loan word is because one, obviously colonization is a thing, right? But two, it's just everybody knows what the word means, and it doesn't take away from what you're saying, and like and also if like with Google, if the word it's a new word, obviously it would take time to have to translate that into English kind of thing. And it happens the other way too. Like there are English words too that I can't think I think déjà vu is one. Déjà vu is one where it's not, I don't think it's an English, it's not an English word. It's like it's not English, right? Like déjà vu or I think cafe or like liaison, maybe things like that where and it's just adopted and we're not like, well, we need an English word for it. It's like, no, we just kind of, that's what it is, that's it. Yeah. Yes. Something always, in the throat,
There you go.
right? My little, and yeah, so it's and then also sometimes like, well, this is a different layer, but sometimes things don't translate, right? Like even in like if I'm using like for certain English stuff, if I'm speaking in Chinese, like there's no, you can't really translate certain words, so you have to use the English, because what is that? Like we don't know what that is, but everybody knows what it is in English. You just say it, right? And especially with kids and stuff, you have a lot of access to stuff online and stuff, so so sometimes even the kids know more English loanwords than the older generations, right? Because they have more access to, and they're more used to social media. And of course, what does social media have on it? English everywhere, right? And all these different, they pick up things. Right. So that's the first layer. So I don't know if you want to say another thing about that, Dagny, or do we want to move on to like, how do people react to you depending on how your English is, or whether your English is the first language, second language, third?
Right, yeah. So we can go now into segueing into languages, using languages as a metric to measure your intelligence, measure your accomplishments, or measure your education. And I've taken note that it's interesting how with the English language, let me know if this resonates with you, but I've noticed that with the English language, we kind of have there's this like bias or prejudice in terms of how you speak it.
Yes.
Even though I think English is possibly the only language where we have a really huge variety of accents that can be used with it, compared to other languages where like you either speak Spanish in these 3 different ways or not, or you speak French in these 2 ways or not, and that's it. Like you can't be coming up with some other type of accent because we can't understand you. While with English, there's a variety of accents. Not all of them can be understood immediately. I might have to ask you to slow down a little bit if your accent.
Even British English, British English,
I'm like, what? Slow that one down.
Are you saying?
Slow it down for me. Cheerios, slow it down, because I didn't catch that one. I didn't catch it. No offense to our British speakers. We love you too. I mean, British listeners, we love you too. It's just, it's a little,
sometimes
the only training I got was all the Harry Potter movies, and that's not enough. So I'm sorry. But there is a bias where if you speak English with not a British accent, or not a US, but in Northeast US, like polished New York or polished Virginia accent, then automatically we are being judged. Or automatically you couldn't possibly be the doctor in the room, right? Or you couldn't possibly be the professor, or you couldn't possibly be the manager here. Like, how can I listen to you if you have this accent? And this does happen within the US, even among Americans. It's not only a deal of like, if you're an immigrant, you're seen a certain way. Even among Americans, the Southern drawl type of speaking, the North part of America is very quick to be
Bless your heart.
You're too slow. That means you're stupid. Like it's just, and it's like, no, are you kidding me? This person's very intelligent. They just speak differently. What's wrong with you? So yeah. So then that added measure of if English is a second language. And so there's either a different accent, or even the way you're putting the sentence together, because the grammar is very different. And so as an English speaker, you can hear that, oh, the person is switching the verb or the noun or whatever, like you can, but you still understand the sentence. But unfortunately, you were already being like, well, the expectation of their intelligence, their IQ must be different. When actually, if they were expressing themselves in their own language, they probably would be smarter than you. Yeah.
Oh, we're going to say another point.
On the flip side, if you are trying to speak another language that's not your first language, so you're trying to speak French, you're trying to speak Spanish, you're trying to speak Tree, you're trying to speak Chinese. I've noticed that, okay, some French-speaking countries are not like this, but other types of languages, they hold space for you to get through this very basic sentence that's a little difficult for you to get through because you're still learning, right? But they'll be patient with you and then just continue the conversation. And even they will like use vocabulary or explain things in their language so that you would understand them, right? While on the reverse side, I think sometimes we can be a little abrupt with the English speaker speaking to somebody who doesn't speak English. And if they're not picking up the English immediately, or if there's some kind of accent, unfortunately, we have instances of English speakers being like, I don't know what you're saying. I don't get it. Do you speak English? Go back to your country. Like that kind of vibe. And it's like,
it's kind of messed up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that we do need to be careful of that. Like, how did we allow, and again, maybe that's due to colonization, of why did we allow English is the barometer of, oh, you speak good English? That must mean you're smart. When like that is like the furthest thing from the truth. I'm not saying we're not smart. I'm just saying the automatic deal of like, this person speaks great English. We must trust what they're saying because they must, know what they're talking about just because they speak good English. Why did we allow that to be the barometer?
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And when the thing you said about France, it makes me think of like in China too, where like if I guess they kind of don't expect foreigners to kind of know Chinese because why would you? So even if you say like, if you just say like, I mean, everyone's like ni hao, but I mean that's not the right tones or anything. But it's like just a little bit of Chinese are like, oh wow, your Chinese is so good when it's not good, but it's just like, oh look at this foreigner, like okay, kind of thing. And and you have to, and then I can attest to that, where it's like if I was judged, like if you only heard me speak, I mean I can speak Chinese like conversationally, but like I don't speak it like I speak English, obviously. It's not my first language and I learned it later in life, right? So if you based my intelligence off of the way I speak Chinese, I probably won't sound that, my level might be a little bit, some younger people, like high school kids in China probably speak better than I, kind of thing. Don't fully get all of the tones right and all that yet. Or if I wrote like an essay, I mean, granted in English, it'd be hard to do that too. But like if I wrote an essay on quantum physics or something, probably, in English I can get through it, but Chinese, even to speak about that, when am I speaking about quantum physics, things like that. And it makes me think of, people that sometimes English is not their first language, so they're not that great at it. But to make it seem like, oh, if they're not good at English, that means they're like dumb. I'm like, no, it's just, and then you go into expression where sometimes like people are very good at expressing certain things or deeper things in their own languages. But if they say it in English, it won't hold the same water or hold the same weight. And so I think, and it's true, like we do get that where sometimes in other places they will be fine with you struggling with their language, like it's fine, like and or they'll slow down, because I've had that too with like friends and stuff where they will slow down their Chinese for me so that it's easier for me to catch what they're saying. But then if you hear them speaking to somebody else, it's like kind of thing. But with me, they take the time to be like, oh, let me slow it down because Damali doesn't fully, what I mean, is not fluent. I'm like, thank you, although even the fast Chinese sometimes helps in terms of like, listening and getting used to the speed of it. And yeah, and also English, I mean, all languages are hard, but English is hard. And English has so many, like, I mean, I did some teaching of English, and like, even for me, like speaking English is fun. I know English, obviously I can speak it, whatever. But when you ask me about the grammar rules and stuff, and you're going to test me on what is a past participle, what is a present perfect, what is the fossilization of the word, like all of this stuff, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Like, what is that?
Are those?
Yeah. What are they? Is this, what? And some of this is a verb, adjective, noun, all this stuff. And I'm like, it could be both, like advertising, advertising, like, that's a noun and like all that stuff. So even for me, I can understand that it's hard to learn, and you really have to, take, if you really want to get perfect, really good English, you have to take like elocution lessons. And even if you understand it and speak it, if you don't do it a certain way, people will, people can judge you about it. And here too, yeah, because if you go to like New York or California, Texas, people do speak differently, right? And like sometimes, and you do kind of, people do have their thoughts about who you must be. And obviously class systems are everywhere in the world, right? So sometimes if you speak a certain way, like, oh, okay, you're down there kind of thing, or you're over there, you're poor, you're rich, or like all of these things, which might not necessarily, be accurate. And it's, of course, in terms of intelligence, like that doesn't, the way someone speaks a second language is not, that intelligent. And also, I also heard that many people speak English, but not many people can speak it well. Like even if English is your first language, it doesn't mean you are like perfect at either kind of thing. And then also I can attest, sometimes it's hard to even understand people that are like I think there was a time a friend of mine who said that he had to he was British, but his British accent was not as thick, but his friends were, and he had to translate their English to the other Americans because the Americans could not understand because some British accents are very thick, really, really thick, and they sound awesome, but I don't know what you're saying, and I have to be like, wow, I have to really listen to understand. And I'm like, I know English. What, we're both speaking the same language. And I always go, well, this is going off a little bit on types of words you use, but I remember this one time when I was in England, I was in the airport, and I think I was asking for directions. And I think the lady asked me, she's like, "Oh, I'm gonna butcher the English accent. Like, no offense." And she was like, "Oh, you're gonna take a left. You're gonna take a left." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And then I'm going around the airport, and I realized, oh, she said lift and elevator. And I'm like, oh. I'm like, oh, lift. And I'm like, oh, I see.
Oh, not
right.
The
so
left?
I'm going on circles.
You mean not the opposite of
left.
right?
Yes. I thought she meant take a left.
A left
the
turn.
opposite of right.
Yeah.
But she meant lift because only America, as far as I know, use elevator.
Exactly. We're the only ones.
Yeah.
Everybody else,
we're the only ones.
Everyone
even,
to a lift.
Even in China.
Yes.
Even in China, you learn the English is British. They learn lift. They don't learn what the heck is an elevator, And so the lady told me lift, and I was like, oh, and I'm like, I think she meant an elevator. So I was a little bit like, we were both speaking English. We were literally both speaking English. Yes. And her accent was not thick. It was a normal, you know what I mean? It was an easy to understand British, oh, okay, just take a left, kind of thing. Not to, I say no offense, and I'm not bothered by my really bad British accent. It's just for the story. That's a little bit, on the another side. But so So that, even that would make me am I an idiot? Just because I don't know the one,
right? Right.
I'm an idiot because I don't know lift and elevator. I'm in America, we use elevator. I don't know what that is. I don't know what that is. Okay. Right. To elevate. Okay. Right. But but it is interesting,
funny,
how people
that is funny. Why did we do elevator and escalator? Why do we even do that? So wait, what do they now? I need to look this up. What do they call escalator? The stairs that move?
Right, I'm not sure.
Do they say?
I know, and I don't know if they say that. We have now. See, we don't even know English.
We don't even know. I don't even know English. Okay, you keep on talking. I need to find this out. So what?
Yeah, exactly. What is escalator? Is it escalator? Probably not. Horrible. No R, right? And then the R's, right? You use R's in America, but in England, you don't use R's. Really. And I think in Chinese, it's not elevator, all those words are the same. I think it's the same. I have to check on that. I think so.
Okay. According to the internet, it is consistent. Apparently they use escalator in other parts of English speaking people.
Wow. So it's just because it's only the elevator. It's only the elevator that's
right.
America just being. Oh, and also the same thing. I think stones are well, I think British stones are English pounds, weighing something, and then pounds is money in England.
Yeah.
So if I'm speaking to I don't know this, and I go to England and stones this or pounds, I'm like, oh well, how much does it weigh? They're going to be like, what? What are you saying?
Yep.
I'm going to be the idiot. You know what I mean? So.
This is what is so fascinating, especially with the reference of being American English compared to everyone else. Because I guess because American English didn't colonize everybody while British English did. Because even the metric of measurements, we will do miles. Everyone else kilometers. And then we want to do what? We're doing feet, and they're doing what? Centimeter. Or something else, even if they're height, they don't do the feet.
Inches.
They won't even do the feet and inches. It's like the other one. Isn't it centimeters or something else? Yes. And it's like we just wanted to be
Celsius,
different.
Fahrenheit,
there you go. The
Celsius.
Fahrenheit and Celsius. Nobody cares about Fahrenheit except for America. Nobody else does. And I'm just like, how did
one other country? America want to be different from England.
We just wanted to be different. We just needed to be the most different, and that's why we're all lost outside of the US, because I still be like, so 30 something degrees Celsius, I just know it's hot. I can't tell you how hot it is, but I just know if it's in the 30s, that means it's hot.
Yeah. I had to relearn this. Like, it's true though. Like with the, you know, like for Fahrenheit, you know, we do Fahrenheit, and then other places, and in China too, they do Celsius. Right.
Yes.
So I really had to like write a chart for myself
to calculate.
Fahrenheit and Celsius are.
Yes.
So even within English and different accents.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think this is a perfect segue also for like the cultural aspects of language. Because when you take note, and whether there's a cultural delusion or cultural enhancement or cultural confusion.
That's a lot, Dagny. What is that?
Hey, we're going to workshop all of it. Okay.
All of the words.
Yes. Whether that happens when it comes to English, because when we're learning a different language, and you listening, please let us know if you are someone who had to learn English, if this was the case. Because I know learning other languages that are not English, there's always a cultural aspect to it. There's a history aspect to it. So if I'm learning French, I need to know the culture as to why they need to go to the cafe at this particular time.
Same thing with Chinese.
And
you
why
need to know
the family dynamic is the way it is. And why, well, in the French culture, this is how they do this is how they do that. This is where they transport themselves. Like you need to become, like, it's almost like you need to be indoctrinated into being a French person if you want to speak this language. While with English, it's like, words. And that's it. And I've always wondered if when you're learning English, do they just teach you about British people? Or when you're learning English, do they teach you like why we have toast with avocados? Like what is is there any culture really? And then if you're going into American English, because I don't know if you can choose when you're learning English, can you choose which type? Like, do you choose whether you want to learn American English or British English, or are you just learning English and you choose which accent you want to pick up? While they will pick up some form of an American accent just by watching our videos, or they will pick up the British accent or the Australian accent by watching different videos. But do you know Australian culture? Do you know British culture? Do you know American culture? Because yes, we do have a culture. Thank you very much. There's a lot of varieties in it, but America has a culture too. It's which then to me then shows like when it comes to whether you can really dilute any other language with English, I think that goes back to your metaphor of like, not to claim that English has no value, but if English actually really is just it's almost like English is more of the transactional language, which is why you just do the words, while other languages have the cultural other stuff to it. So it's not just transactional. I'm not sure. I haven't sat in the only English class that I sat in was the regular ones where we're having to do grammar and writing and essays, but I wasn't being taught a so-called English culture with that outside of what we're reading English books. Yeah,
I would agree. Yeah, even with when I was teaching, but there's a lot of British English we're using. A lot of times if there's videos we're watching, it is in a British, very rarely was it an American accent, or the videos we use, they're all British accent, Australian accent, and they're speaking about, but it's not always so much about the culture. It's kind of about like a thing. There's one about like food intake and your sugar intake, and or elderly people's activities, or like it's not. I mean, there's a little bit about the Irish one I watched about. But again, it wasn't like it went all into the full history of the potato famine and the English colonizing the Ireland. It was more just talking about the language part of it. And I don't think there was. It's like you get snippets of it, but it's not as full, I think, as if you're learning Chinese. If you're learning Chinese, you really do need to it would be hard to learn Chinese without the culture aspect of it, because the language is so heavily influenced, obviously, by the culture, like kind of thing. And there's history behind there's some Chinese words, like if you don't know the history or get then you won't get it fully. You'll miss the nuances. Not that English doesn't have nuances, but I feel like a lot of times people are just learning, like you can learn English without. And then also, I don't know if it's because America is so good at exporting pulp culture and it's all over. So like people know about a certain American culture without having, like, it before you even learn the language. Do you know what I mean? Like everybody knows especially pop culture, movies that come out. Everybody knows the American movies. Everybody knows Taylor Swift. You know what I mean? Everybody knows and I don't know if that's considered our culture, right? Because that's a very small pop culture, a very small part of America, right? Because there are other parts, the working part and all the different.
It's more of our propaganda that is.
Yes, that we export out and things like that. So people would know all, and again, the American slang, all of that.
Yes.
So we don't really, but we're not really learning it in that like capacity, like in 19 something, like I don't think well with the classes I taught, in other classes maybe there's more, but it's definitely a different type of teaching. It's more about the English language. And then also apparently I found that there's actually more people in the world that know English as a second or third language than there is people that know it that was their first language.
Right.
There's more people who've learned it than who are native English speakers. And also just because you have know English doesn't mean you're a good speaker. But I thought that was interesting to note that and also it's like I guess the reasoning behind learning it, right? Because it's like when you're learning English, like what are you using it for? Is it because I just think it's cool, or is it more of, well, most of the world speaks English, so I have to learn it or else I won't be able to, and then you have those I think there's they're called English medium schools, where everyone comes from a different I think you come from a different country, but the main language you use to communicate is English. Right? Or I think there's other programs where people can come from France, from Germany, from the Middle East, from China, but the main language they use to speak is English. Right? So, or even I had a friend who had 2 roommates that were Chinese, but one of them was knew Cantonese and the other one knew Mandarin. And I don't know if you know about Chinese, Mandarin and Cantonese are very different. They're completely just because you know Cantonese doesn't mean you can understand Mandarin. So the Chinese girl that knew Mandarin could not understand the one that was using Cantonese, so they had to use English to communicate. So as opposed to, we're going to use German to communicate. No, you know what I mean? You get me? It seems that English is always if I don't know your language, you don't know mine, we can use English then. To default is English, right? So it's as if, again, like you said, I think it's more of a transactional thing where it's just I need it to be able to communicate and to be able to travel. It is easier to travel. If you don't know, regardless of what language you know, if you don't know English at all and you travel a lot, I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it could be quite difficult to travel around the world if you don't know any English, right? And then also how English is kind of taught everywhere. You kind of have to, when you're younger, you kind of have to take English. It's part of the curriculum. Whereas it's not the same with Chinese. I didn't need to take Chinese, right? But you kind of, they kind of make you take English, right? And so it's kind of the reasoning or the purpose of learning English is not as much about immersion in culture as it is how do you communicate with the rest of the world if you don't have that language. Whereas of other cultures Spanish or maybe, but Spanish or China or Japan, you kind of you will miss many nuances and kind of be stuck if you. I can't imagine learning Chinese and not learning about the culture. How would I even, and that's even to add to how daunting it is, because Chinese, they don't even use letters. We're not even using letters. The only reason letters doing it as pinyin were used was to make it obviously easier for foreigners, right? But these are just there's no if you can't read it and you can't hear, there's no way that so it's already daunting, and then you also don't want to. How would you learn Chinese with the culture? It would be very hard, right? But for English, I'm not sure. And also, what culture are we learning? Because English is like, it's like all these other words are put into English from all different cultures all over the world, you know, like, or even, yeah, even Chinese words like I think about like kung fu,
Yeah.
for example.
Yep.
That isn't an English word, but we say kung fu or
Yes.
tai chi or
Yep.
jujutsu.
Exactly.
You see what I mean? So when you learn English, like which culture do we focus on?
Or even
like
chai,
how
when we say chai tea,
oh
you're
yeah,
literally saying tea,
chai,
tea.
Thai. Exactly. Like, so
Right?
it's like, how do we even, and America is so kind of like different and
Diverse.
united, divided, however you want to say it, united, divided, whatever, that which culture do we learn? Like, you know what I mean? Like, you know, which is you only know the things you need to be, you know, so it's interesting. It's just interesting to see how, and then you bring in Latin into it, you know, which is like a dead language, but people still learn it because it helps you with the root
It helps
stuff.
you with grammar.
And then other languages.
I had to learn.
Yeah, and then other.
Latin.
Let me just finish real quick.
Go ahead.
Other languages, like for example, there's a guy I knew that I think he learned German or something, and he said that it helped him with English. Like he already knew English, but learning German helped him with like root stuff with English. And I'm like, oh, so it goes that far back as well. So, but yeah, as you're saying about, because you learned Latin in school, I think, for a time, right?
Because yeah, the curriculum for English classes at least in Texas, when it comes to middle school English classes, we had to be learning Latin words because a lot of English words have Latin roots to them. So there was a lot of memorizing Latin roots and stuff that apparently would help us with our grammar and vocabulary, even though we're all English speakers and that sort of thing. But I think that also noting this deal of how if English is the transactional language of the world, as well as the colonizing language of parts of the world, I think that is a good segue also to take note of how language influences personality or how you express yourself. And when, like, at least this is what I reflect on or think of a lot when I'm in a space where, like, I know I'm around people who English is one of the variety of languages they know, and it may or may not be the first language. I've always felt like, even though the default is we're speaking English because now we can understand each other, I've always felt like, but I know that there's a part of this person I may not ever have access to because it's in a different language. Like sometimes I feel like this person, someone's humor is not in English. They can still joke and laugh with you in English, but that other side of them, which is like the really witty joke or the expressive storyteller, might be in a different language altogether. And it got me thinking of how when people who are multilingual, do you have to mold your personality to carry the different language?
Heavy question.
Because already, yes, you are going to change your accent a bit in order to carry the language. And then if it's a language like we just noted that is a different language that has a whole other culture and history to it that you need to carry with it that is foreign to you, you need to hold space for that. Or then the language, you won't be able to carry the language. So is it a different version of you speaking that other language altogether? Like when I do be practicing speaking French, I know that my personality is different when I'm speaking French. I think actually I end up being to express myself, I might even be even more cartoon-like in how I'm expressing myself because I feel like I'm having to explain the word instead of saying the actual word because my level of vocabulary is different in French than it is in English. Right? And so when you're dealing with getting to know if instead of using language as this is business transaction mode, which is or academia mode, which is the default when it comes to if we're going to be going through English. If now we're utilizing language when we're building community or interacting with people or trying to build a rapport with people, how does one hold space for that if we are all defaulting in English, but the others who are defaulting in English because you are the English speaker are kind of having to carry a different personality with you than they would if they're speaking with somebody that they can speak the language that they pray in and joke in and cry in. You possibly don't get to experience that. And then vice versa, even though if as the English speaker, this is who your personality is, and this is the language you dream in, this is the language you think in, when you are speaking with somebody who can they hold space for that if English is not their first language? And they don't, if they're listening to you, but in their mind, they're constantly translating what you're saying into the language that they are comfortable with. Do they really hear you then? Can they really see you? Or does some of it get lost in translation? And then finally, I know we'll have all these branches, but this is just things I was reflecting on.
Right.
Really you take note of how much more, if that's the right way to say it, how more almost robust other languages are compared to English. Like when you look at poetry written in Arabic or Spanish or other languages, almost the depth that they are able to describe an emotion in words. You can't do that in English. We only have, like in English, we only have one word for love or one word for hate or one word for what we feel. In English, emotions become a bit restricted because there's only one word to describe it. While in other languages like Arabic, they have like 1,000 different words to describe the different nuances of this one emotion.
It's an older language, yeah.
Yes, that too. And so I've always found that fascinating in terms of, I feel if one could, not only learning another language is not only about like, so I can interact with other people or for business and stuff, but I think if one could learn another language in a way where you could possibly read history in another language and understand poetry in another language, I feel like you possibly could gain even more insight about the world because they can describe or document the world and life in a more vivid, expansive way than we can in English. I'm not trying to belittle English, not at all, because I mean, we had Shakespeare, Shakespeare, and that's amazing.
Mark Twain.
We had Mark Twain. We had Oliver Twist. Like, oh my goodness, we had Toni Morrison.
Fury. Sound in the what's this? The guy. Sound and the Fury.
There you go.
The name of the Great Gatsby. I'm just kidding.
There you go. We had Maya Angelou. Like, yes, we have used the English language really beautifully. But it is very different compared to what they're able to, like, I just feel like in other languages are really able to paint with words in a way that's so beautiful that English sometimes can feel like it's still on training wheels because of the way the vocabulary is or the way vocabulary is used.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah, and I really think so a lot because I'm really into K-pop, I'm into BTS, I'm into K-pop, I'm into anime. So obviously a lot of times there are languages all over the place with me, right? And so I noticed that, like sometimes I prefer to watch the Japanese dub. Like I'll prefer to watch, the Japanese dub of an anime instead of it in English. A lot of times the English irritates me. Like it's not the same way. It's not as good. And I'm just like, no. And I go right back. I rather read my subtitles where the Japanese is there and I get it, kind of thing. And as I watched it more, I've been able to understand more of the humor and things like that. But even sometimes I have to pause it to look up, why is this funny, kind of thing. Or like with Chinese, like there's one time like my teacher she said some joke in Chinese, but I didn't really get it fully. And she laughed so hard. She was laughing so hard and I didn't fully get it, but you don't want to stop the person laughing and ask them, wait, what's the point of the joke? And so later I had to figure out myself. But when you figure out a joke like that, it's hard to laugh at it if you have to dissect it, right? But you see how this can get in the way of the humor, right? Where like, oh, because my Chinese is not as great as my English, it was hard to understand how that comes across. And also I remember this one time I was on a trip I was traveling in China and I was watching a show, but the subtitles were only in Chinese. And so I can pick up Chinese well, but I'm not fluent in it. So some of the stuff is kind of hard for me to fully understand. And I was watching this show and it was like, she said something, and then the girl next to me, who wasn't my friend, whole stranger, mind you, sitting there sleeping, woke up, glanced at my thing, and then started laughing. And I was like, You're laughing and it's my show. You know what I mean? Because she was Chinese and she got the joke immediately, and I'm still waiting to catch up. And I was like, what the heck? And when you ask her in Chinese, can you explain to me why you're laughing and looking at my stuff, stranger?
There you go.
So it definitely, ties into that. And it's true. Like, I think things, and with my Chinese coworkers also, like because they would speak Chinese obviously most of the time, but we're speaking English, we're teaching English. So they speak English and Chinese, but you can tell the way they, like, even if I don't fully understand it, when they're expressing their Chinese, even their voices change, the way they move changes, their eye, like so much of their interaction changes in Chinese than when they're saying it in English. And whether they're speaking to me in Chinese or in English. And it's really interesting to like see that. And also, yeah, when you come into like poetry and stuff like that, I mean, that's also why, like the more you learn, the harder it gets. Like when you first learn a language, it's hard, but a little easy, because like, okay, hello, how are you? What color do you like? What food do you like? How many people are in your family? What job do you have? But when you get into the deeper stuff, the meaty stuff, it's like, more, but it's so like things, yeah, like reading poetry and having to like break it down with my teacher versus me doing it by myself. It's a very different, it's a different way, and then you can't fully translate everything, right? Because I mean, especially if you don't have the culture behind it. But even if you think of the culture and the word and the everything, it's still like, do I fully follow this kind of thing? And it gets, and then what I've been finding with my, in terms of personality, is that I'm having the issue where I know what I want to say, but my Chinese is not at that level yet. So I want to explain myself so badly, but I don't have enough Chinese like to fully figure out how do I express myself in this like huge way with all these emotions. So you just kind of try your best to put the words together to speak it. But it's, yeah, I would say that, I mean, for now, it's probably just, obviously even my speaking is slower, right? And the way that I explain stuff, and probably the way my voice goes up and down when I'm speaking the different languages, obviously it's like different. But yeah, so definitely say humor, I agree, because some things are not as funny in one language as they are in others, right? And of course, the older the language, the more you have this like, because especially like in many older cultures, obviously China's very old, so a lot of their culture and their stories are all connected to some deeper stuff. And I remember getting into like conversations with my coworkers about different metaphors and what different things mean and how things translate. And I'm always like, if there's an English metaphor I use, I'm always like, what is it in Chinese? Because I don't think it's the same. Like when we have like, oh, it's raining cats and dogs, I don't think that really translates. Like, it's a little bit, they have something a little bit different, right? So yeah, so definitely when it comes to humor, same thing with like, I'm into BTS, so they speak, I mean, the main leader, he does speak English, but I do find that when he speaks in Korean, obviously it's different, and the way he expresses himself, and like the music, and like, and even with the English translation of their lyrics, I still think it's not, it's almost like when you're listening to it in Korean, like even with the subtitles, I know that I'm missing a layer. Like there's a layer of emotional understanding that's like not fully there. And I'm kind of like, I know that if I could actually understand what they were really saying, then like it would actually make sense to me, right? And even if you do have the subtitles, or you're watching anime or something, or you're watching the English subtitles, I'm still like, oh, how would I? There must be some way, like if I understood it, I'd be able to really get through to it. So, but yeah, so I think it does make, I mean, it definitely makes languages learning fun, but you have to really get to a really high, like very very fluent part, I think, to really, and even then, right, to really fully like do I fully get the full expanse of emotions from this language, even with it being translated? So basically what I'm saying is everyone has to learn every single language in history. Obviously,
Yes.
I'm just kidding. Just learn it all, right?
There you go.
I don't know if you can. Like, is it possible for me to learn a language as well as English? Like how? Like I've been speaking English for over like decades, like, so yeah, it's interesting.
I feel other people
that
have,
is very,
it just takes
it takes
a lot of commitment, because it's so easy to default into the language you are used to.
Yes. Yeah. And then having to change, like, you don't want to translate every single thing. You kind of have
In
to
your mind.
just
Exactly.
get it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Clear your mind and just get it. But yeah, that's why sometimes, yeah, I sometimes do prefer to listen. I rather have the subtitles. You speak in your language, put subtitles so I can kind of, but and then of course there's the extra layer, because if you try watching something without the subtitles versus with them, that also is a different experience.
Yes.
In terms of like the emotional side. And I know sometimes, to add one more part, there's some people in the comments that are like, oh, okay, like I watched the anime, I watched the Japanese dub first to understand it, and then I watch it in English so I can actually look at their face expressions, so I can focus on their face expressions and their actions, because your eye has to keep on going up and down when you're reading subtitles. So there's that. So sometimes I do that, where like, I need to just watch this and not, I need to rewind, and watch it again. And yeah, but it's very, it's definitely an experience. And yeah, I don't know how you just deal with that. And hopefully one day, I don't know. I mean, I know we're figuring out things where like there's devices that you can hear and they immediately translate what the person is saying. So then maybe I can finally see the other half of your personality.
There you go. There you go. Because even I think
just learn everything.
I forget, I think it's the new Samsung phone, I think, which I haven't gotten. It's just, I know that this feature is there. But they now, because now they're putting AI in everything. And so the phone is able to, when you text in one language, it can automatically send it in the other person's language, like automatically translate it for you, kind of thing. I'm not sure if they're going to try and get it to be audio as well. So even though I'm talking to you in English, my voice is coming to you in a different language. I don't know. But that sort of thing, which then, well, is that what it's going to be 10 years down the line? Where does the art of linguistics, the whole language
come in? Yes, exactly.
Where does that go? Like, do you need to have a foreign language in your curriculum if now everybody has access to these gadgets that are enabling you to just remain in your default and speak? But that's the thing, because that connects back to what we were noting on about language being just a transactional thing, as opposed to language being an emotional, community cultivating thing. Because if you're only using gadgets, that kind of puts all languages into transactional mode. This is just to let you know I'm going to be there in 5 minutes, or this will let you know this will be delivered by this time, as opposed to are we going to be using this to send poetry to each other? And will the translation give me the poem you're trying to give me through a gadget? Right. I don't know. That also reminds me. And sorry, one more thing. That also reminds me of recently, Ghana's film industry is like in the era or the realm or the time to wanting to like change the name of their industry and wanting to take notes from like South Korea's film industry and other industries to make it a more robust space, especially since now there's also some foreign interest of wanting to like invest and film here and things like that. And among different things in the conversations, someone had brought up that, in 2024, do we still need to be making movies here in Ghana where everyone is speaking only English?
The dubbing and subbing thing,
modern English, but like really big words English, beyond SAT words type English, when nobody out here is speaking like that.
Incorrigible.
Why? In aggregate, like if you're not normally saying that. And it was interesting because the person making this point, which I think they were making a good point of like, there's a constant complaint about the talent in Ghanaian movies. It's not reaching where it should reach. And the point they were making is that if you're making them do these movies in English, they really are only, not to say they can't act, but you will get a different version of their acting if you allow them to do it in their original language and then just put subtitles in English for everybody else to be able to,
like the K-dramas.
And that was something I noted of like, even with the K-dramas and for the Ghanaian films, I'm like, actually, it would be great to see if that would make a difference for them. If they actually chose of like, actually, maybe this film doesn't need to be in English. Maybe it could be in Ewe, it could be in Ga, it could be in Fanti, and then just put the subtitles and put variety of subtitles because you have so many different dialects in this country anyway. So even though they're speaking one, put all the subtitles for the different dialects as well as English and see if that makes a difference of are your actors really, are they acting now to give you what you need as opposed to just English? Because it makes me think the K-dramas, which are now like the epitome example that everybody else wants to try and
taking over the world.
You know, everyone wants to try and take notes on how they did their film industry. It does make me wonder, like, if they actually did a movie all in English, as wonderful as their actors are, would that acting still be at that level if it was all in English? Or would there be somewhat of a, you almost got it, you were almost there, but the English word didn't take you there kind of thing?
Yeah. Especially with the more intense emotional scenes where they're like the actor is going ham, like they're like in their zone, but you have to say it in English instead. I think it would be very difficult to, you know, do that in that way. You know, even when they do use a little bit of English in it, I'm always kind of like, whoa, what the heck? I don't know. Don't do that. Don't do it. You know, and I think that. Yeah, I feel like the subtitles do make it. I mean, of course, it's the way to, you know, I mean, I guess if we have certain technology, that would also help with that because some people have issues with subtitles. So if it's a way where you're listening to the K-drama or, you know, or the Ghana film or something, but in your ear, there's something that translates it, you know, for you as well, which and that's another layer of it's really intense, like the translating thing when they have those big like ambassador type things, and while the person is speaking they're translating as it's going. That is crazy.
That's
like do we understand how like do you know how difficult that must be to switch back and forth, and you have to get all of the nuance and write like as in time, like even if you're really good at the language, I think that would be so that is hard, right, to go back and forth. And I feel like that's very taxing. It's exhausting because your brain has to keep on switching, and you know you're making all these different like synapses in your brain. But yeah, it would be cool to see that if in Ghana, if Ghana they had more of that where like you don't have to change, like not everything has to be in English. You know, we don't have to, like sometimes it's as it is where it like should be. So yeah, interesting. So much for So how that's all. Yeah, that's all I got.
All right. Well, to bring it all in.
Linguistic how pure are the languages, or how diluted are they? Let us know.
There you go. So we hope you enjoyed this conversation. I think in aggregate, in summary, yes, languages and linguistics are very interesting, actually, and and it's interesting to see how they will continue to evolve, and how we have to
globalize the world we have,
molding this so-called globalized world that we're living in. So we hope you enjoyed the conversation. As always, let us know your thoughts or what stood out to you. We love hearing from you. And actually, if you have been listening up to this point, I would like to know what languages do you speak, and which one do you feel you're most authentic in?
All deep.
All right. So let us know. You can comment wherever you're hearing this. Either, well, if you listen to this on Spotify, that will enable you. You can comment on there, or comment on the blog post at dagnyzenovia.com. But I'm intrigued to know. Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say how, speaking of the languages, I remember when I was in, when I was doing study abroad, and there was a girl that knew like 5 languages. And I know each language you learn, I guess, but I think there's like Hindi and English and Spanish and French, and she's learning Chinese and everything. And I feel like that must be, I mean, speaking about how you emotionally like show and reveal yourself, imagine having 5 different languages. And it's like, and for most people that's normal. Like if you know 4 or 5 languages, it's no big deal. Like it's like, I switch between them whenever I need to, and it's no big deal. And you just kind of, it's seamless, you know? And I think like, I'm just like, wow, how does your brain look? Like, how's your brain activity? You know what I mean? That's so cool. But anyway, maybe in my next life, I'll grow up learning 10 languages, you know, whatever.
You know, it's all about the environment.
That's all I had to say.
Because people like that also, like you were in an environment that had that. It was just normal to be picking it up. Unlike our environment, but it's fine. We'll get there.
Yeah, but it's different. But it would be cool to hear how you listeners feel about that, about learning different languages and knowing different stuff like that. So yeah, but I guess
All
I guess
right.
that's it for today.
We'll
Have
see
a
you
good
on the
day.
next
Stay blessed.
episode.
Let us know how you feel.
All right. Bye. Take
Okay, all
care.
right.